Here with Tim Winton, the author of a new book called The Turning. Tim has been shortlisted for the Booker twice, another very accomplished author in our presence. We've just come back from a reading at the Harbourfront International Writers Festival, and you were reading with Jonathan Coe. He was reading from his latest novel, a very sort of funny sequence about absent-minded fathers picking up the wrong kids and wives using sex or the withholding of it to modify husband's behavior. In this case, the husband was swearing in front of kids. So it was a fairly hard act to follow, I thought. And you came up and started reading something that was really quite a bit different from what he was doing. It was low-key Australian sort of vernacular, a couple of teenage kids, lads working at a meatpacking plant, and I found that there was a lot of soothing detail of the landscape, lyrical, but with a lovely natural Australian dialogue. Normally, these kinds of works put me to sleep, but there was something that you did that held attention really, really well, and it got the audience, I think, caught up in this lyricism. I wonder, can you tell me what you were doing?
No. I was just working my way into the story, really. I mean, as a writer, you that's what you're doing. You're starting with something simple in this case, and you just go deeper, and you find the layers, and you find the music in it, and the dissonance and the kind of unresolved thing that draws you back, and also it's, being able to say this as an observer after the fact, but you find the counterpoint, you find all the kind of music in it. But, I'm a writer from a position of small towns and landscape, and the kind of writing of the metropolis, of the sort that Jonathan does, and which I admire enormously, it just isn't my emotional patch, and it's not my geographical patch either. So, for me, the work is about figures in landscape. The characters' problems are enormous to them, and they're surrounded by an enormity which is impinging on them in ways that they don't understand, and which will still be there when they're middle-aged and when they're old, and it was there before their little problems arrived.
You mentioned during the talk that you thought that music was a much more emotionally moving form of art, much more so than literature.
Yeah, I think music is infinitely more potent and more immediate than literature, and I suppose I say that as someone wistfully seeing another cab go by, and my brother's a musician and I admire many musicians. I don't have any, I'm not wistful in the sense of I wish I'd been a musician, but that just what you can do to somebody in 2 minutes as a composer and or a songwriter from time immemorial, really, whether it's the sound of clapping sticks in a didgeridoo, or the sound of a cello alone, or it's the sound of an atonal chamber piece. I mean, it's just remarkable what you can achieve immediately. And words just take time, and writing a novel is an incremental business as in the process of writing it, but it's incremental in how it's read. It takes a while for it to build up. Music's the same in the sense of the size and the scale of pieces, but
it takes time to write a good piece of music.
Yeah, sure, but it takes less time to read, to hear a piece of music, even if it's Wagner's Ring cycle, than it takes to read the average novel. A poem inside 2 minutes that will break your heart and remake your life, but there's infinitely more pieces of music that can. Music is so freighted with memory and place and a kind of a familiarity that links you to situations. If you're away from family and home for weeks, almost everything that you'll be listening to is going to be associated with home, and it's bad enough listening to some music when you are at the hearth, if you like. But I learnt from several tours ago, particularly in the last couple of weeks of being away, that it was just best not best to, best to refrain. And you do hear music and you are affected by it, but you get into a sort of a weird state of not quite knowing where you are and being a little emotional and naked, and fall in love with newsreaders, or soft toys or small children passing. Anything that's not to do with writers or publishing or airport. You're looking at other people's children on the plane in a way that might disturb some passengers. So you try and do that Jesuit thing of practice the discipline of the eyes. Tough it out, it'll be all right. It's not that bad, but I really I just do find music. I mean, it's fabulous, but it's like a film with a soundtrack. Sometimes you'll just be triggering. A piece of music would trigger not just the film, but where you were that week and who you're with. And
what about just taping a whole bunch of upbeat tunes?
Oh, that's probably worse. It doesn't matter. It's not a melancholy piece of music necessarily that's going to undo me.
It's just the memory.
Yeah, it's what it means, and it's all the freight, all the baggage, all the stuff that attaches to it. That I mean, it can even. It's not just music. I mean, it's the olfactory senses are probably my biggest thing. So many books that you open up and you can smell the classrooms of your childhood, and the kid who sat next to you and peed himself on the first day of grade 1. All that sort of stuff. Whatever it is, but yeah, that music, landscape, memory. It's all that soup that we swim in.
You have a wife and children, I assume.
Yep. Yeah, I have one of the former and 3 of the latter.
You could walk down the streets of Toronto and no one would recognize you.
That's the good thing about being abroad for me. That's the truth. So it's nice to be anonymous in another place. So that definitely. But then I'm not doing much walking down the streets of Toronto. I'm travelling in a sort of a kind of road show. It's like I've joined a cult.
Cult's a good word for it.
It has all the cozy and all the chilling connotations, but I think that's. I mean, you'd like to think that in terms of the business of reading and writing, that you're part of a community. But every now and again, you do think that you might be in the compound at Waco, and somebody's got the gasoline drums out, and someone else has got the lighter. You just haven't quite picked out who each of them are and where they are in the building.
I can relate. I mean, I've only been at this festival for 3 days. I'm leaving, as I mentioned, this afternoon. And I'm even getting a bit tired of talking about books and writing, so it must be there's a certain thrill, I imagine, the adulation and the recognition and feedback and all that stuff. But it must be difficult to talk to people like me.
Well, you left me nowhere to go there, mate. It's self-consciousness of it that makes it wearing. It's not the fact that it's about books. And I mean, I am interested in books. I mean, I've spent my life doing nothing but write books and read books. That's pretty much it. There are other things I do, and there are other things I love, and I have a life apart from books. And it is a great, privilege to be able to be part of this and to meet people and to be introduced to new writers and to understand the politics of the places that you're sort of fleetingly visiting. But yeah, sometimes there is a point at which you're if I could figure out what the rules of hockey were in this hemisphere, then I'd be thrilled to talk about it, And what's that guy, Don Cherry, what's he on about?
Love that guy.
Good. Love that collar.
Funny thing is that most people that are literary hate him.
Is that right? Okay. Well, I've only seen him, and we can't be talking about him on air.
But he is a Canadian icon, and one of the things that's so refreshing about him is that he doesn't take the edge off. He's a bit like an Australian.
Well, I'll have to take your word for it.
But I think that was a compliment. But.
Oh, thanks.
Just one more question about the book itself, The Turning, which is really a series of linked stories, correct? The reading that you did was one of the stories. The way that you folded it down was quite interesting. Basically you're going along, you're wrapped up in the lives of these two guys that are sort of just beginning their adulthood. And then the narrator steps in, which I found to be a little sudden jolt, to tell us that one of the boys would die a year later and that the other one would spend the rest of his life in the same old town and get married, and then sort of that was the end of the story. It's almost like when you watch a movie and then it ends, and then they sort of come back with something that says this character was in prison for this length of time. Can you talk a bit about that technique and other authors you might have admired who used it? Or
well, I actually can't think of anybody at the moment, but I realised a way into the story the first time I wrote it that I was writing a story which was only ostensibly in the present tense. It was a first person story, and it seemed to be told in the present tense. And because I didn't read all the story, there are other pieces that you weren't being able to. That was only a piece of the story. You get this creeping sense that there is more knowledge to the narrator, and there's a little bit more going on than just this immediate relating to what's happening, what seems to be happening now. So it slips in and out of that. Essentially, what I was doing, really, I think, in the end, in the final writing, was just fine-tuning what I'd done by accident, if you like. And in a way, even though neither of those characters are specifically related to in the rest of the book, they set a kind of an emotional tone. They set the milieu of the rest of the book. Other people who are mentioned in the book become central to the story. A couple of incidents from that short story then are pivotal to other people's lives. So in a sense, what's happening in that story is happening in the other stories and in the collection as a whole. That technique's not necessarily used again. Well, it might be more than once, but in a sense it becomes a way whereby I can go around the corner and go tangentially into everybody's lives without anybody expecting to. So it's a sort of entering the room by accident, entering the next room, finding yourself in another house. It's I don't quite know how to explain it, except that it's the process of writing it is quite similar to the sense that you get surprising as you read. The writing and the reading are the same.
Yeah, you hear that a lot from authors, is that they really don't know where the story is going to turn, and that's part of the fun of it.
Yeah, I knew where the story was going to end, and I knew I wanted to write about these two characters. But as I said before, I'm not a planner. It would be cold-bloodedly planning something out and then executing it would be a little like painting by numbers, which isn't meant to downplay the kind of work that can be done by that technique, because some people do it fabulously. I know that for me, the way I would do it would end up being a form of painting by numbers. I would get bored and then I would change the plan out of publicity.
Jonathan Coe, he's been accused of sort of over-controlling his characters, whereas I guess in real life he's not anywhere near like that, but in his writing life he is. But you'd say that you're more of a, let's see where this takes me.
Perhaps that's not. I mean, I'm writing out of a kind of an instinct, but it's not as if I don't have some things in mind. I think also Jonathan Coe was writing about a more socially circumscribed world, a more fixed social world than me, because he's from a different culture, and there is a kind of steely inevitability about British culture, which is changing and mutating, but it's only noticeable that it's mutating because of how fixed it's been, and that's why the British are funny for a start, because they can do that deadpan. It's about how fixed things are and how you move within the kind of welded social frame. How you transgress that, or how you are ironic about. I guess my works and my culture is more new, more raw, still a work in progress by comparison.
Australia being a much younger country.
Yeah, an infinitely older continent, and in terms of its recent incarnation, a much younger culture. there's, like all settler cultures, there's a lot of energy, there's brutality, there's verve, there's opportunity, even if it's not always pretty to see it seized. But there is the sense that someone like me, at least, is in the position of being able to feel as though they're taking a more open path than if I was from Western Europe or Russia, or perhaps China even, where there are places where things seem infinitely done so many times, done forever. It can be bewildering as to where to go. You feel like you're always in someone else's footprints. To be a human, that's true of anybody. But if I think it would be harder to be a French novelist than to be an Australian novelist at this point.
I'm thinking about a great Australian film called Gallipoli. I think it was one of Mel Gibson's first films, and pommy bashing. Is there any of that goes on in your writing?
Well, if it's present in the culture, I'm sure it'll be reflected in the writing. So, am I spending time deliberately whacking the English? I don't think so, but life's too short. I mean, obviously there is a complicated feeling about England from the convict era, from the disaster that we were drawn into in the First World War without any choice, with being betrayed by Churchill at the fall of Singapore, and turning our attention and our affection complicated again toward the Americans after imminent invasion by the Japanese. So it's a deeply conflicted relationship, and it's not something I've written about directly, but I'm sure the people in my books would have all the appropriate prejudices.
It's interesting too that Churchill sent Canadians to Dieppe as cannon fodder. I mean, we deal with similar conflicted feelings, of course. I want to turn our attention to your library. I wonder if you could tell us about your bookshelves.
I guess I'd spent years with pine planks and house bricks as a way of storing books, and I was lucky enough to be able to have a library built for the first time. But maybe it's something that probably every middle-aged man's going to do once, or a middle-aged man of a certain tragic sort is going to do once and probably regret it. And when I'd moved into the house I'm living in, I bought the salvaged timbers from a 100-year-old jetty or pier or whatever the word is that you use here. The wood was jarrah, which is the local West Australian mahogany, a very beautiful, very hard red wood. I needed 300 or 400 metres of timber, and it just felt better not to have caused the felling of any more trees. And so I managed to salvage this jetty.